This video is optimized to help you sleep or relax. There's no sound effects, just the sound of rain through to the end. If you're planning on falling asleep, please like the video now and say hi in the comments. Your support is really appreciated. Remember to lock your door and get yourself a glass of water. Thanks for watching. This happened about 20 years ago, and I don't think I will ever forget it. Back in those days, I was an apprentice hairdresser for one of the top 5 ranked stylists in Japan. Training in that profession at that level was very strict, and beauty standards were a bit different. You probably don't need me telling you that, but it's probably worth keeping in mind. Back to training, it was long, and the time off between sessions was pretty much non-existent. We were expected to be at training even during national holidays. I'm not sure if that was strictly by the books, but as impressionable young stylists, we couldn't be seen refusing training. I think I had about 3 or 4 days off for summer. I took them all at once, and a lot of my friends and coworkers used that time to head back to their hometowns and see families. Since I lived really close to where I was studying, I didn't want to use my time off just hanging around at home. I could do that anytime. So, I accepted an offer from one of my seniors to visit his hometown. It was really late by the time I finished work, and we managed to get to my senior's hometown at around 2 a.m. The satellite navigation system told me that we were about 15 minutes away from arrival. The roads were dark and empty. We were the only ones on the road that late. He lived in the middle of nowhere, so that could have been a reason. I remember seeing empty fields on either side of the road. I kind of regretted coming already. I mean, what the hell were we going to do here? He should have probably mentioned that he lived in the rural countryside. I just watched the road and tried to stay awake. I should say that I was driving. I felt like driving since I didn't get to drive much. I might have changed my mind if I had known it was going to be that far to get to his family home. Then suddenly, something appeared out of the darkness in front of the car. A woman with no clothes came running down the opposite lane of the road towards us. I slammed on the brakes because I thought that I just witnessed the paranormal. She ran past us. I looked in the rearview mirror to see a woman between the ages of about 18 to 20 years old. She kept running, then she turned around and ran towards our car. I looked at my friend, and he had a look of disbelief on his face, and I guessed that I didn't have that much of a different look. I think the reality of the situation was we both didn't know what to do. I said to him, "Is that a ghost?" "I don't know. Shall we just keep going?" he replied. We slowly pulled away. I was very skeptical because I thought she looked so real. I made sure I kept to a low speed, and I kept checking the mirrors. The woman got closer, and I stopped the car and said to him, "That's not a ghost. Come on, we have to stop and see if she's okay." He agreed and said he would call out to her. It was so creepy to see someone running around in the middle of nowhere, even creepier if you haven't been to that place before. She kept on running past our car, so I tried to match her speed as my friend rolled down the window and tried to speak to her. "Hey, you shouldn't be running around on the roads like that, this late at night. Maybe you should head home," he said something like that. It wasn't very well put together or that sympathetic, I remember that much. She didn't even turn to face the car, she just said, "Hey, don't worry, I'm fine." It feels so good. I could see her a little closer now and guessed her age to be around 18 or 19 years old. Why are you like this? Have you been kidnapped? Has someone done something to you? It's really dangerous to be out here with no clothes and alone. We have to get you home, I said to her. She stopped running and looked down at the floor as if in thought, and then replied, "I ran away from home. I don't even know where home is." I noticed at that point that she was actually wearing socks and shoes, so at least her feet weren't too bad. She stood there with her hands behind her back, looking completely lost and confused. It was very odd. I couldn't leave her out here. I told my friend in a hushed voice that we had to help her, and he sighed but then nodded. We decided to take her to the nearest police station. I had a dress that belonged to one of my female colleagues at work in the back of my car. Long story short, I told the woman to throw it on, and she reluctantly agreed. Once she was dressed and in the back seat, I turned to her and said, "Right, if you can't remember where home is, I can take you to the police and we can figure it out from there, okay?" To that, she responded with something outrageous. "I hate the police. They're always on my dad's side. Please, can you just take me to a hotel? Hotels are safer than police for sure. You can stay there with me. Hold me tonight. I'm a virgin." We were young, but even though we were young and often threw caution to the wind, we knew that we had to get her somewhere safe. It's a scary world out there. If she said that to another pair of guys like us in the next car that came along, well, I don't even want to think about it. We told her that wasn't going to happen. She didn't say anything for a while, but then she handed me a piece of paper. I don't know where she got it from, but it had a name, a number, and the address of a hospital. My friend saw the address and said, "Oh, I know that place." It was a psychiatric hospital. We called the number, and a voice that said it was the security department answered. I explained to the security guard what happened, and after we hung up, we got a call from the woman's mother. We found out where her mom lived and took her there. My friend said that he knew that side of town, but he had never been there before. The woman's mother was extremely apologetic over the phone. My friend spoke to her, and he said that he could tell that she was definitely genuine and sorry for the inconvenience. I felt sorry for her. It wasn't her fault. When we got to the house, we heard more about this situation from her mother. The woman we found out in the middle of nowhere had only just turned 18. She had been assaulted by her biological father when she was 16. A few days after he did what he did, she stabbed him in the neck with a box cutter knife. She was admitted to a mental asylum because of this attack. No one seems to know how she keeps getting out, but the mother said to us that this was the third time she'd successfully broken free. What a sensational story, I remember thinking. We drove the mother and daughter to the hospital at the mother's request. I could see how mentally tired she was by all of what had been going on. She was so polite and grateful. She really impressed me. I mean, with all that happened, she seemed to be incredibly in control of her own emotions. The girl didn't seem to say much. She seemed to like the dress we gave her. The mother apologized for not washing it before returning it, and we both agreed that no apology was necessary. Obviously, she got dressed into clothes of her own. She disappeared upstairs to change, and then she came back, and we took off. She didn't say much when we were driving. She was taking being returned to the asylum a lot better than expected. I thought that she would be going kicking and screaming. Her mother spoke with her in the back as we drove. She said, "You didn't get injured or anything when you were out, did you?" "No, I'm fine," the daughter responded. "Oh, that's great. I'm relieved," the mother told her. We left them at the hospital and told them that we couldn't stay because we were already really late getting to my friend's parents' home. My friend's parents were really worried by the time we got there. I think that we both wanted to tell them everything about the situation, but we were too tired to go through it all again. At that point, I just wanted to go to sleep. I stayed with him and his family for 3 days. It was actually a really great time and just what I needed, a break from studies in the city. It was certainly going to be a trip I would never forget. We said our goodbyes to the family, and his little sister asked us for a ride to the station. I said that it wouldn't be a problem. Just before we dropped her off at the station, she said something that scared the hell out of me. "Hey big bro, why does your friend have a box cutter stabbed in the back seat?" So, a quick backstory. I used to live in a very small town, predominantly safe for kids, with only some drug issues. My house was located in a small upscale part of the town. Most people who lived there were families. A small pond with lots of greenery in the neighborhood was about a 5-minute walk from my house. To get to the pond, you had to go down a grass hill. Neighborhood kids, including myself, would always go down to the pond for hours to catch frogs, skip rocks, and enjoy nature. Now, onto the story. On this particular day, it was raining and pretty cold, so there were no other kids at the pond. My best friend, her brother, who was 1 year older than us, and myself, decided to head down to the pond for a bit. After about half an hour, we saw a minivan pull up at the top of the hill. We thought nothing of it, assuming it was probably someone stopping at the neighborhood mailbox. A man, probably in his 60s, got out. In our small town, everyone knew everyone, or at least recognized each other. I found it strange that I had never seen this man before in town or the neighborhood. He just stared at the three of us for what seemed like forever. Suddenly, he yelled at us, saying, "It's not safe down there, you kids better come up here." My best friend and her brother looked terrified, and I had this gut feeling that something wasn't right. We didn't respond, but he kept repeating that phrase. "It's not safe down there. You kids better come up here." Our fight or flight reaction kicked in, and we all sprinted up the other side of the hill, just a few meters away from him and the minivan. As soon as he saw us running, he got into his minivan and started driving slowly behind us, literally following us until we reached my house. Fortunately, my garage door was open, and my parents' cars were parked inside. We hid behind one of my parents' cars and watched as he pulled to the side of my house and parked. My parents were inside, unaware of what was happening. He stayed parked in front of my house for a couple of minutes until my dad came outside to take out the trash and saw the three of us hiding. I guess the man saw my dad and drove away, but as soon as he left, we told my parents everything. Even now, 12 years later, my parents still think we were being overdramatic and that the man was genuinely concerned for our safety because of the weather. Nonetheless, we weren't allowed to go back to the pond anymore. I understand why they think this. The three of us tended to exaggerate things and be dramatic. However, I knew from the strange feeling I had when I first saw him at the top of the hill that something was off. To this day, I still believe he was planning something, but maybe it was just my childish imagination. I used to work in a hole-in-the-wall gas station out in the sticks of North Carolina. I was freshly 18, had a new car, a rundown Chevy, but it got me from point A to point B, and was newly promoted to assistant manager, so I was working many late nights by myself. Truthfully, I loved working alone. My boss was super laid back, and his philosophy was, as long as the work gets done, do whatever you please. We even had a shotgun behind the counter, which he taught me to shoot on my first day there. So even though I would be there late, I always felt safe. On this particular night, it was extremely dead, so with my boss's permission, I closed the store early and hopped in my car. It was probably 11:30 to 12 a.m. at this point. Other than being able to get out of work early, this was my usual routine. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I texted my roommate to let her know I was getting home early. We always looked out for each other like that, lit up a cigarette, and then started on my way home. For those of you who don't know North Carolina very well, I'm going to provide a little bit of detail regarding the terrain. From where I worked at the gas station to where I lived, I had to drive down the back roads. These roads consisted of very dense woods on both sides. Sometimes, the woods would seem so thick that you really couldn't tell where you were, especially at night. This could be intimidating to those who don't know the area, but honestly, I was more worried about deer jumping out in front of me, which was a common occurrence in this area. I'm driving down the road, blaring Nirvana, my favorite band at the time, and just being a typical 18-year-old grunge kid who had newly discovered the freedom of being an adult and getting off work. When all of a sudden, I see something in the middle of the road, probably 75 to 100 feet ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it looked too small. So I started to gradually slow down, ultimately coming to a stop. I have to wear glasses when I drive. I mainly need them at night, but my eyesight isn't terrible enough for me to make it a habit. I grabbed my glasses and put them on. Now being able to see much more clearly, I almost shat myself at what I saw. It was a woman. An older woman wearing what looked like a nightgown of some kind. Her hair was in disarray, she had her hands behind her back, and she was just standing there in the middle of the road, just staring at me in my car. Let me remind you, we are practically in the middle of nowhere. There are trees as far as my headlights can shine, and it's midnight. I'm naturally paranoid, so all sorts of questions were running through my head. Who is this woman? Where did she come from? It's midnight. Are my doors locked? Why is she out here at midnight? Should I honk my horn at her? Should I call the police? What if she has Alzheimer's and doesn't know where she is? Or what if she's an escape patient? Even though the closest mental facility was 3 to 4 cities away, I didn't exclude that possibility. I thought about calling the cops, but I got my phone and of course, there was no cell service. This encounter went on for a while, just sitting in the middle of the road, mentally questioning what was happening. It's now way past midnight. She's still standing there, just staring at me with this zoned out look, hands behind her back as if she's observing me. I'm starting to get tired of this, considering that I had to be up early for work the next morning. So I honked my horn at her. I didn't expect what happened next. This woman's face turns from being spaced out to complete rage. And she raised her arms up. It looked like she was holding something in her hand. She lets out this horrid animalistic scream and charges at my car. As she ran closer, I realized she was holding something sharp. It looked like a kitchen knife or a piece of jagged glass. During this moment of horror, I had a brief flashback to my stepdad giving me advice when I first got my license. If an animal ever runs out in front of you, turn it into a speed bump. I love animals, so I couldn't bear to hear that. But this time, I was taking my stepdad's advice. I was going to turn this psycho into a speed bump. Serve the Servants by Nirvana started playing on the radio. I mention this because the song has much to do with the aura of the moment. As if it was in sync with this instance in time, the intensity of the song enabled me to let out the most intimidating primal scream that I could. Loud enough for her to hear it. The window was open because I had been smoking, and I hit the gas. She was running towards my car like she was going to jump on my hood. I guess she realized I had the utmost intent to hit her, in which at this point, the woman zigzags away from my car and runs off into the woods. Still in fight mode, I didn't question where this woman went. I was just glad that she was gone, so I accelerated on the gas and sped the entire way home. I got home at almost 1:30 a.m. My roommate was still awake, waiting up for me the entire time. She was extremely worried because it was way past the time I said I was going to be home. She had been texting and calling me. When I pulled up to her house, I got all of her texts and missed calls at once, so I started to explain to her what happened. My body went from fight mode to panic as I was recounting everything that happened. My roommate's mother was a 911 operator who also happened to be working that night. So she decided to text her mom to see if there were any silver alerts in the area. Immediately, her mom texted back and said there wasn't. That alone gave me goosebumps to the core of my being. There was no explanation as to where this lady came from. I used to work in a residential care facility, and for a number of years, I worked with a woman named Kajiri. She was generally okay to work with, but she could be intense. The sort of joking flirtation that often found its way into high-pressure environments was common throughout the whole team, but when she directed it at me, it didn't seem so jokey. It took me forever to realize, because I usually didn't notice someone flirting with me until someone else pointed it out 6 months later. But when she started trying to give me jewelry and chocolate bouquets, I finally started to pick up on it. In between things being normal and actually maybe not really normal, there was a long escalation of text messages, comments that made me uncomfortable, personal space violations, dropping by my house uninvited, hanging around on my shift hours after hers had finished, unwanted touching, etc. As mentioned, I can be slow to catch on. Once I realized what was happening, I put as much distance between us as possible. I stopped answering calls and texts, locked down social media, spoke to other colleagues and had them running interference. A lot of interference, actually. At the time, it kind of became a joke, but looking back, it was all kinds of messed up. She even parked outside my house sometimes, and I'd sit in the back room with the light off so she'd think I wasn't home. After a couple of months of my disappearing woman act, she seemed to get the hint and backed right off. I was pleased. We all got on with our lives and lived happily ever after. Yeah, not quite. A few months after it died down, I heard through the grapevine that Kajiri seemed to have focused her attentions on another coworker, Linda. Linda and I had a close mutual friend, but didn't know each other well. I didn't think much other than good luck, you poor sucker. A few months later again, and I got a call out of the blue from a mutual friend. Without preamble, he asked, "Were you dating Kajiri?" No, I don't swing that way. I was shocked. He had been privy to all the awkward details of my experience with Kajiri and had helped run interference. He explained that he had been talking to Linda and she'd asked about my relationship with Kajiri. The story that followed still sounds too fantastical to have actually happened in an actual sensible grown-up workplace. Kajiri had been catfishing her own best friend Amanda, posing as Linda. In a string of emails, fake Linda and Amanda had discussed Kajiri's drug problem, her abusive and dangerous ex, none other than yours truly. There was a story about fake Linda coming out to her family after her brother caught her in bed with Kajiri, and more. The jig was up when Linda got a second job, coincidentally with Amanda's husband, who mentioned how great it was to finally meet Kajiri's girlfriend. Which was a complete shock to Linda when she learned about herself, that she was no longer a straight woman and had a girlfriend. So essentially, Kajiri moved on from me, found a new target, started emailing Amanda from a fake account, pretending to be Linda. She told all these stories about being with Kajiri, about how I was an abusive ex, and how Linda was caught by her family being with a woman and all the drama that it caused. She made up a bunch of insane stories to justify her creepy obsessive fantasies and was telling them to Amanda and other people from a fake email to make it sound like the stories were from the fake girlfriend and Kajiri couldn't be accused of making it up. Here's some highlights of the stories Kajiri had been telling to Linda, her friends, and other coworkers I wasn't close to. She picked her audience very carefully. That Linda and I had physically fought at work over Kajiri. That I had an orgy in the staff office on a night shift with Kajiri and 2 male coworkers. That Kajiri and I had broken up after I cheated on her with another male coworker, not one of the orgy ones. I was really getting around apparently. That I would drug her against her will. That we had planned to have children using a sperm donor, but that I couldn't decide who would have the baby. This woman had been living out a full-on soap opera and using her coworkers and friends as characters. Linda and I reported her to management, and she was immediately suspended, pending investigation. She quit 2 days later. Unfortunately, HR decided they needed to continue their investigation of the allegation that I had an orgy at work. Because that was totally plausible and not at all made up by a crazy woman. They put me through hell investigating this imaginary story about me and 2 men and another woman. Even though the only men in our department are twice my age and happily married. It made me never want to trust HR again. I left that job a month later myself, and when I interviewed for my current job, she had interviewed half an hour before me. And they were looking to hire 2 people. She didn't get the job, but there have been 2 other openings since, and she applied for both of them. I'm terrified of meeting her again. It turned out she has a history of inpatient psych treatment for delusional behavior and was known to be obsessive about people she took a liking to. According to Facebook, her current girlfriend has a similar first name as me and shares more than a few physical similarities. She still knows where I live. So I'm pretty sure that the current situation is that she's still telling people that I'm her girlfriend, all while she's desperately applying for any job she can get at my new workplace. Okay, so I wasn't conventionally nor classically pretty. I was the duff in any friend group I found myself in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. Safety concerns were never an issue for me when going out because I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around. I was just too plain. It was always me who had to look out for my friends, male and female alike. I used to go to a local bar almost daily. I didn't drink alcohol there. I just ordered a regular Coke and waited for my ride home. It was my usual hangout spot after work, so I sat, chilled, and minded my own business. A few weeks ago, I had just finished work and was sitting at my regular spot, sipping my drink while working on a new pendant I was making. I had started wire wrapping crystals into jewelry. I didn't expect anyone to strike up a conversation with me, knowing I basically blended into the walls, despite the staff knowing me and paying me slight attention and being nice to me. But this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and engaged in a small conversation that I can't even remember how I started, but he began asking me a few questions about myself that seemed normal and flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. Again, being plain, I didn't think anyone would take interest in me. By then, I had drunk 3 glasses of soda and needed to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went. When I returned a few minutes later, I resumed working since none of my stuff had been touched. I called a waitress over, asked for a new drink, and she nodded. It had always been engraved in me that you never leave your drink unattended. If you do, either have it remade or leave it to the bartender. As the waitress was reaching for my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit agitated, saying I was being wasteful for ordering a new drink. I looked at him, eyebrows raised in confusion, and asked why it was his concern. It was my money after all, and refills were free. He then accused me of making more work for the waitress for no reason. Annoyed, I told him firmly that it was my business and if he didn't like it, he could leave. He attempted to wave off the waitress changing my drink, but I had enough of his nonsense and flatly said, "You drink it, if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to catch him off guard. He looked shocked, then a bit angry, before storming off. I then handed the drink to the waitress, expressing unease about the guy I was talking to, and asked her to inform the bartender to keep an eye on him. I requested to have my drink dumped out and only water served from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after, and the next day after work, I found out he had been arrested for assault. I only found out today what exactly had happened. Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender caught him tampering with a girl's drink while she wasn't looking and prevented her from drinking it. The guy got angry, leading to a physical altercation. The cops were called, and now he's awaiting trial. It turns out he was trying to see if he could take advantage of someone like me, someone who always let her guard down due to low confidence. He thought I'd be an easy target with just a little attention. When I didn't consume my drink upon returning, he targeted another girl. If he truly was targeting me, I have to question his sanity and sobriety.